down an old dirt road with very odd and very private hillbilly neighbors that you never go on their property unless you have been invited. That's the kind of farm I'm talking about. Hills, mountains of Arkansas. And because my dad was a minister, we moved around a lot, and it was the most stable place in my life. So I spent a lot of time there on the farm, and there's a lot of great memories there, a lot of nostalgia. And so when people ask me where I'm from, I usually tell them I'm from Marshall, Arkansas, because that's the stable place that I had in my life growing up. Now, in late July and early August, we would tend to the hay fields. Anybody know anything about tending to the hay field, hauling hay? A few of us. My grandfather had about 30 acres of hay. And it may not sound like a lot, but it was just an old tractor and 2 or 3 of us boys, 12 or 13 years old. And Grandpa didn't like to make light bales of hay either. He made them just about as heavy as he possibly could so the rope wouldn't break. So from the morning till night, that's what we were focused on. So if you know anything about hay, when you cut the hay, you got to get it into the barn, because if it rains and gets wet, then all that hay would ruin. And so late July, early August, we focused our attention on the hay. And we put them in square bales, and we stacked them in the barn. That's what my grandpa would use to feed the cows during the winter, and also he would sell some of the hay for extra income. But there's one thing that you had to keep your eyes out for while working in the hay fields or on the farm as far as that goes, and that is snakes. And how I hate snakes. For instance, look at this dude. This snake. Boom. It just looks like pure evil, does it not? In my opinion, the only good snake is a dead snake. And if you have a pet snake, I'm just going to go ahead and say it, you're crazy. Because pets are for petting, and they're for loving, and they're cuddling. No one wants to cuddle with that face. No one wants to pinch those cheeks and kiss that face. Matter of fact, have you ever heard the story of the lady who had the pet boa constrictor? I'm sure some of you have heard the story. Her snake was acting funny. It wasn't eating, and it would stretch out along the side of her on the bed. And so she got a little worried, and so she went to the vet, and she said, you know, my boa's acting weird. It hadn't ate in many, many days, and it keeps stretching itself out alongside me on the bed. And she says, so I'm a little concerned. And the doctor said, well, you probably should be concerned, because I think your boa constrictor is getting ready to eat you. And that's why it hasn't been eating, and that's why it's been stretching its body out to make sure that she will fit. That's why you don't have pet snakes, because snakes will turn on you. So back on the farm, to make matters worse, my grandmother would always warn us to be careful. And I don't know if this is true or not, but Grandma sure thought it was true, that August was the dog days of summer. You ever heard of that, the dog days of summer, which is the hottest part of the summer. I think they call it the dog days of summer because I looked it up on the internet, something about the dogs just like to lay around. But anyway, during the dog days of summer, this is what I remember the most about it, and that is that snakes will be shedding their skin. And because they're shedding their skin, it causes their eyesight not to be as normal, as good as normal, and so they will strike at anything and everything that moves. So, if you're walking through tall grass or tall hay that's about chest high, and you happen to get close to a snake in the dog days of summer, he's probably going to strike at you and bite you. So be careful, Grandma says, and thank you, Grandma, for that little bit of advice. I will try my best to be as careful as I can as I'm walking through hay that is this tall. I mean, there's no possible way that helps me. That information doesn't help me at all. There's no way for me to be careful. And so what I have learned now in my life, my grandma has completely traumatized me, because anytime I'm walking in grass that's high enough that I can't see what's down there, especially in August, you know what I'm thinking about? I'm thinking about snakes, and I'm thinking about the dog days of summer, that if I get too close, it's probably going to strike at me. So let's look at a couple of things that you have to worry about if you're in Arkansas. For instance, this first picture is a picture of a copperhead. You go back to the other one. It's the back one. The copperhead. Okay. So the first one's a copperhead. It probably couldn't kill you, but it would make you very, very sick unless you got bitten numerous times. And then the next one is, actually, it's a cottonmouth, or it's a water moccasin. And this is true. This guy has a pet cottonmouth snake. And the same guy was actually going in for a kiss, and he got bit on the mouth. I'm not a genius here, but I know enough to know that A, you don't have pet cottonmouth snakes, and B, you don't try to kiss them, and C, when they cool up like that, it's not because they treads, and we have cottonmouths, and the next one we have is a coral snake. You may or may not. This is Tennessee and Arkansas who believe that at some point in the service, as the worship really starts getting going, that they want to prove their faith to God, and so they'll walk up and they'll take out this rattlesnake that is completely venomous, and they will start dancing around with it to prove their faith in God, just showing God how much faith that they have. And if you get bit by the snake and you die, it's because your faith wasn't strong enough. And it has happened. As a matter of fact, one of the major networks did a documentary I was watching a couple of years ago. This still happens. It still goes on. And they're doing a documentary about this young man who was the pastor of one of these churches. And his dad, who was a pastor, had been bit and killed by a rattlesnake. And he himself had been bit in worship numerous times by a rattlesnake. And as a matter of fact, when they had finished filming the show, just a few months later, they had put on the end of the show that this gentleman had actually been bit and killed by a rattlesnake because he didn't want to seek medical help because he thought he was trying to prove his faith in God. There is another scripture in the Bible I like to point out. It says, "Do not tempt the Lord thy God." So I'm not picking up no snake. I'm not trying to prove my faith to God by picking up any snake. And don't you worry, this is not that type of church. There are no snakes coming out at all. And I just imagine that if we pulled out a rattlesnake, this place would empty out pretty quick. And I guarantee you that I'm the first person out the door. That's my bit on snakes. Can't stand them. I want to talk to you this morning about a snake that Paul encountered on the island of Malta. But there's a little bit of a backstory that we first need to cover. The story takes place in Acts chapter 27 and 28. And I'll just kind of give you a minute to turn there if you haven't made it. But Paul is a prisoner. And he's headed to Rome to stand trial to appear before Caesar for his crimes, which were made up charges by the Jews accusing him of starting a cult and blasphemy against God. But because Paul was a Roman citizen, he asked to have his case heard by Caesar. And they could not deny him that right. And so he was sent to Rome to stand trial there. So while they were sailing, the ship encountered some very strong winds that blew them way off course. As a matter of fact, they shouldn't even been sailing. They had to think about, should we sail? It's late fall, and you really shouldn't be sailing in the waters in late fall. But they wanted to get to Rome. They wanted to get Paul to Rome. And so they decided that they were going to go ahead and try to sail. And Paul even came to them and said, listen, if you keep sailing on toward Rome, we're going to have a wreck. But the captain didn't listen to Paul, and he pushed on anyway. And a few days later, a really bad storm came up, and it blew them out to sea. Things got really bad. They couldn't make it to shore, and they ended up getting blown further and further out to sea, and things were not looking good at all. But Paul called everyone together. He called everyone together in Acts 27, and he told them, he said, don't worry, I had a visitation of an angel last night. An angel came to me in a dream, and he told me that we're all going to be okay. We're all going to make it. I have an appointment. I have a destiny, a testimony to give to Caesar, and God is going to see us through this storm. Paul believed that God was sending him to Caesar, and so this storm wasn't going to stop what God had in mind or what God had in store for him. Paul knew that God was sending him to Rome. Paul knew that his mission wasn't over, and so he knew that this storm wasn't powerful enough to stop God's plan. So basically he said, you guys are with me, and you're going to be okay. Let me just stop right here, and I just want to tell you, and I want to encourage you before we go any further, that there is no storm big enough to stop God's plans. No storm big enough to stop God's plans. It doesn't matter what you're going through this morning. It doesn't matter what you're facing. It doesn't matter what storm you might find yourself in. It doesn't matter if you have even caused it or someone else has caused it or the devil himself has caused it. There is no storm big enough to stop God's plans. If God started something in you, then God is going to finish it. You're going to come through this. You will be standing when it's over. His work will be accomplished, because greater is he that is in me than he that is in this storm. Amen? I just want to encourage you that if you're going through a storm today and you think you're going to perish, God has a plan for your life. You're not going to perish. You are still going to stand. God is going to see you through this. You are going to make it. So when Paul went to Jerusalem, before he even got on this ship, he went knowing what was going to happen. He went knowing that the Jewish leaders were waiting for him. People warned him not to go to Jerusalem. People even prophesied it to him, but he knew what God wanted him to do. He knew that God had a plan for his life, and he also knew while he was on that ship that God didn't send him this far to let him die in the storm before his work was ever completed. So Paul said, don't worry, we're all going to be okay. We're all going to live. However, we are going to be shipwrecked. It is kind of one of those good news, bad news scenarios. He said, this ship is going to go down, but we're all going to make it. We're going to sink, but don't worry, none of us are going to die. And I know that you would probably prefer to hear that the ship's not going to sink. I know that it would be better news for me to stand here and tell you that things might not get worse. But the possibility is that it might get worse before it gets better. But the encouragement that I want to give you today is that your work isn't over and you're going to make it through this storm. Things might get a little worse. Finances might get a little worse. Situations might get a little worse. But it doesn't matter how bad you think they're getting. You are going to make it through this storm. You may have to ride the storm out. The ship you are on may even go under. You may find yourself in the middle of the water clutching on for dear life. But remember these words. I want you to write these words down. And I want you to get this in your spirit. You are going to make it through this storm. Amen? Amen. Whatever you're facing, guys, whatever you're going through, whatever struggle, whatever fight it is, whatever you're battling with, you are going to make it through this storm. Just don't give up because God has something good for your life. So on the 14th night of the storm, 14 nights, can you imagine? 14 nights of this. 14 nights, day and night, they're trying to hold on. We know there's a big storm right now happening in Texas. There's a hurricane. And actually, my sister and brother-in-law tried to ride it out because they didn't have the money to get a hotel. And if you leave, you can't come back for 7 days. So not going, they said, we'll just ride it out. We'll be okay. Halfway through the night, their roof blew off their house. So they said, all right, we're out of here. They had to get in the car and they had to take off. And so there's a huge storm. But imagine being out in the middle of this storm on a ship and doing your best for 14 days straight to try to keep this thing afloat. So they're fighting the storm. They're fighting to keep it above water. But on midnight of the 14th day, they noticed that the water started getting shallow. And they checked it again, and it started even getting shallower. And so they were afraid that they might hit a sandbar, so they had to do something even more dangerous, and that is they had to drop their anchors and try to hold it out. The Bible says that they dropped their anchors and they prayed that daylight would come as soon as possible. And then the sailors tried to get out the lifeboats and try to sneak off the boats. And Paul went to the officials and he went to the Roman soldiers and he said, if these guys leave, they're all going to die and all you guys are going to die too. So they cut the lifeboats away and they stayed aboard the ship and they just waited. Once again, Paul encouraged them, just like I'm encouraging today. He said, we're all going to make it. He got them all together and he said, all 276 of us that are on this ship are going to survive. As a matter of fact, don't worry. As a matter of fact, let's all just sit down and let's just have a meal together. And let's all sit down and eat. And so they did. They all sit down in the middle of that storm on that ship as it's rocking back and forth. And they broke bread together and they ate. And it reminds me of Psalms chapter 23 when David said, he prepares a table before me even in the presence of my enemy. It's amazing it's an amazing thing that God can give you peace like that in the middle of the storm. And I pray this morning that if you're going through a storm and you're having to ride that storm out, that God will give you the same peace, that in the midst of the storm, he will prepare a table before you. In the midst of whatever you're going through, in the midst of whatever you're struggling with, in the midst of whatever you're facing, that God will give you peace right there in the middle of it. And peace to know that he's going to take care of it. But things got worse. The ship did hit a sandbar. The ship went down. The soldiers said, we need to kill all these prisoners because there's no way we're going to go back to Rome without these prisoners. But again, Paul assured them that they would all be accounted for. And it was cold, and they had to jump overboard. And the water was freezing, and the rain was pouring down, and the waves were crashing. But every single one of them made it to shore just like Paul said. Why? Because God wasn't done yet. because Paul still had work to do. I guess it might have been an unexpected delay, and at least it was unexpected to Paul, but God still had a plan, and everything was going according to God's plan. You know, when you're out there in the middle of the storm and you think to yourself, God, what's going on? God knew this was going to happen. He knew this storm was going to happen. God never gets surprised by anything that takes place. But he knew exactly what was going to happen the entire time, and God had a plan. Sometime later, after all this is over, Paul would be sitting in a jail cell in Rome, of all things. And he wrote a letter to the Philippians from his prison cell. And in this letter he said, chapter 1, verse 6, he said, I am certain that God, who began the good work in you, will continue that work until it is finished. And when he wrote that, Paul knew exactly what he was talking about because he had seen it firsthand. God finishes what he starts. When God starts something, he will finish. And if you aren't finished with what God has called you to do, then don't worry, you're not going to perish in this storm. So whatever God has started, whatever work God has birthed in your spirit, whatever calling God has put on your life, it isn't over just because a few storms blow up. And those storms have not surprised God at all, so don't let them surprise you. Because the God who began this work in you will continue that work until it is finished. God is not done with you yet. As a matter of fact, as much as I don't like preachers who do this, will you just turn to your neighbor and say, God's not done with you yet? Will you do that? Just tell him, God ain't finished with you yet. He is not done with you yet. So, in the next chapter, things are pretty rough, right? Prisoner, on a ship, blown off course, big storm, 14 days in the storm. Ship goes down, icy cold, freezing water. And finally they get to the shore. Now let's see what happens in the next chapter. Acts 28, verses 1 to 3. Let's look at verse 1. It says, once we were safe on shore, we learned that we were on the island of Malta. The people of the island are very kind to us. It's cold and rainy. So they built a fire on the shore to welcome us. As Paul gathered an armful of sticks and was laying them on the fire, a poisonous snake driven out by the heat bit him on the hand. After all that Paul had been through, it wasn't enough. Now he was getting bit by a venomous snake. Have you ever felt like that? I mean, just like bad things just don't stop happening to you? Have you ever felt like that? Yeah. Like, I mean, just boom, boom, boom. Keeps going and keeps going. Like, God, really? What's going on? And the natives, they watched and waited. And the reason why they watched and waited is because they fully expected that Paul was going to swell up at any moment and just keel over. And then they actually began to wonder, what kind of man is this? That the gods would take down the ship, they were thinking, because they were quite a superstitious lot. And he would make it off the ship and onto the shore. But then the gods are so mad at this guy that they're going to let a snake come out and bite him on the hand. To them, it was a bad omen, and it seemed that the gods were out to destroy him. And sometimes I think we think that same way. When bad things keep happening, we think, God, you must be out to destroy me. Paul made it through the storm. He made it through the soldiers threatening to kill him. He made it through the shipwreck. He made it through the ferocious waters. He made it to the shore. And finally, he has a chance to breathe a sigh of relief. Finally, he's on dry land, and everything looks like everything's going to be okay. He promised everybody they were going to make it to shore, and they make it to shore. But then all of a sudden, things get worse. This poisonous viper comes out of the sticks and latches on to his hand. And notice how it happened. Paul, he picked up some sticks, and he transported those sticks. And he went to put those sticks on the fire, and the snake that was in those sticks felt the heat of the fire and finally woke up and came out and bit him. This is what I want to talk about for a moment, the fire and the viper. Paul picked up these sticks and the viper didn't do anything. Paul probably jostled these sticks around as he was walking toward the fire, and the viper didn't do anything. He transported these sticks from one place to another, and the viper didn't do anything. And the whole time, the viper was there in the sticks, seemingly unbothered and unthreatened. No amount of movement, no amount of being busy did anything to awaken him from his slumber and cause him to strike. But notice that the moment the sticks were introduced to the fire, the viper came out of hiding and attacked, not just striking, but latching himself on to Paul's arms. This is the analogy that I'd like to draw for you this morning. Some of you are here this morning and you're wondering what's going on in your lives. Some of you are trying to figure out, where is all this opposition coming from? Things just keep getting worse, and they keep getting worse, and they keep getting worse, and you don't know why. And it feels like you got just a moment to breathe, but then here comes the viper. And I can tell you exactly where it's coming from. It is because you are getting too close to the fire. You're not just moving around anymore, and you're not just being busy, and you're not just doing churchy stuff, and you're not just going to church for the sake of going to church, and you're not just giving your hard-earned money in the offering plate because it makes you feel good and spending your precious time for no reason. But there is a fire that has been ignited inside of you. There is a passion that has come alive in you. Something has come alive. You are now living for a purpose, and you are serving for a purpose, and it's starting to burn like it's never burned before. And the viper, the enemy, the devil, he hates it. He can't stand it. He fears it. So for a while, when you were just moving around, and for a while when you were just staying busy, he was content to stay asleep in the sticks. But the moment that you get too close to the fire, which is God, the all-consuming fire, you best believe that the viper is going to come out of the sticks and attack you. And that's good news, because you're doing something that you're supposed to be doing, and that's why he is attacking. So yeah, of course he comes out of hiding. You have awakened him, and now he is attacking with everything he has, and he's latching on, and he's trying to kill you, destroy you, or at least intimidate you into quitting. He wants you to think that you need to quit, that you need to back away from the fire. And this is exactly what Paul could have done. He could have just backed off and said, you know, I'm not going to put any more sticks on the fire. I mean, if there's snakes in the frickin' sticks, I'm not picking up any more sticks, right? But instead, he just went ahead and threw the sticks on the fire, and he kept on doing what he was called to do. And that's what I want to encourage you to do, is don't let the viper scare you away from getting closer to God. Don't let the viper scare you away from doing what God has called you to do. But you just keep on feeding the fire, and you let God take care of that stinking snake. Amen?
Amen.
What did you think was going to happen when you got close to God? Do you think that he was just going to lie there? Did you think the viper was just going to lie there and not put up a fight? Did you think that you were going to get on fire for God and an enemy would just concede? He is fighting you because you are invading his territory. But that's okay. Let him fight. Let him bite. Let him attack, because we have a destiny, and our destiny is that we are going to be winners. We win. It is already written in the book. In the end, we have victory. We are going to win this thing.
Amen.
So let's read on and see what happens. Acts 28, verse 4. The people of the island saw it hanging from his hand, and said to each other, a murderer, no doubt. Though he escaped the sea, justice would not permit him to live. The people waited for him to swell up and suddenly drop dead. Isn't it interesting, first of all, how we equate bad circumstances with punishment? For instance, I must be going through this because I've done something wrong. Or I must be facing this because I'm not in the right place. Somewhere, somehow, I must have gotten out of God's perfect will, and this is where I find myself, in this place of disaster. And, you know, we tend to try to answer for why things are happening, and the dumbest answer that we can sometimes give someone who is going through a problem is by telling them that maybe they've done something wrong and that's why they're going through this. It's just not the truth. Sometimes it's the farthest thing from the truth, because Paul was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. He was going exactly where he was supposed to be going. God told him to go, and he knew he was supposed to go there. So why did it happen? Why? Why do sometimes bad things happen? Because this is a war. And the enemy is going to fight you. The enemy is going to attack you. He isn't going to bother with you if you're not doing anything real. But the moment you start turning the heat up, he's going to come out and fight. And so I wish I could stand up here and tell you, oh, give your life to Jesus and everything's going to be just perfect. And you're never going to have any more problems. And you're never going to have any more issues. And you're not going to have to fight with your addictions. And you're not going to have to struggle. And you might not ever have to face any bad things again. But that's just not the truth. Because the moment that you come up here and you surrender your life to Jesus, the enemy is going to come out and attack. But the difference is that in the midst of those attacks, you can have joy. And you can have peace that you've never had before. And you can know that in the end, you are going to win. Because we are destined to win this thing. And the people around him, this is the crazy part, the people around Paul, they start talking, they start pointing their fingers, and they start criticizing and judging. The people around you may do the same thing. You may be going through some struggles, and you may be fighting through some things, and people might be pointing their fingers at you and saying, what did they do wrong? Why are they must not be doing something right, or they wouldn't be going through this thing. That's just not the truth. When this happens, sometimes it also causes us to question ourselves, and it causes us to question where we are and what we're doing and the church that we're in and the ministry that we're involved in. Sometimes it will cause us to just want to back away from the fire, to distance ourselves from the fire, or maybe it'll just paralyze us. Maybe the enemy, if he could just get us paralyzed, that we won't do anything anymore. We'll just stop doing anything. But there is only one way to destroy the viper, because if you back away from the fire, the viper just goes back into the sticks, and he just goes back to sleep, and you'll always be there. And anytime you get too close to the fire, it's going to keep coming out of the sticks. But there is only one way to destroy the viper. Don't let him go back to sleep anymore, but let's kill him once and for all. Let's see how you do that. Acts chapter 28, verse 5. But Paul shook off the snake into the fire and was unharmed. He shook off the snake into the fire and was unharmed. The people waited for him to swell up and suddenly drop dead. But when they had waited a very long time and they saw that he was unharmed, they changed their minds and decided that he was a god. Of course, a superstitious lie. Of course, we know that he wasn't a god. But they realized that something wasn't the same about this man than every other man. Paul just shook the snake into the fire. He didn't bat an eye. He didn't blink. He didn't jump back. He didn't reevaluate things. He didn't say choice words like some of us may have. But instead, he shook the snake into the same fire that caused it to stir. And the same fire that caused it to stir is the same fire that burned it up. And he went on about his business like nothing happened. He just shook it off. He didn't freak out. He didn't start crying and whining. He didn't start trying to figure out what was going on and what he was going to do. He didn't bury his head in his hands. He didn't start backing up from his responsibilities. He didn't blame God. He didn't blame other people. He didn't stop giving. He shook it off. He just shook it off. Listen, the same fire that is in you that has caused the enemy to come out of hiding and attack will be the same fire that will consume him. Our God is a consuming fire, and that God dwells within us, and the enemy can't stand the fire. The enemy can make threats, and he can taunt you, and he can criticize you, and he can even bite you, and he wants to intimidate you, and he will try to kill you. But that same fire that is in you, that fire will destroy him, because he can't stand the fire. Just like Paul, the storm couldn't kill Paul, and the shipwreck couldn't kill Paul, and the soldiers couldn't kill Paul, and the water couldn't kill Paul, and the viper couldn't kill Paul, because God was in control, because God was watching over him, because God wasn't done with him yet, and because God had not yet finished what he had started. And I want you to know this morning that even though Satan is throwing everything he can at you, and you best believe that the worst that he has, he is attacking you with right at this moment. He is giving you his worst. And I want you to know that you are going to make it. God is going to see you through this. He is going to finish what he started. Don't let the enemy intimidate you. Don't let him drive you back from the fire, but instead just shake it off. Your best is yet to come. Sickness, shake it off. And you still might feel sick, but just shake it off and keep doing what God has called you to do. Fear, shake it off and keep doing what God has called you to do. Debt, shake it off and keep doing what God has called you to do. Depression, shake it off and keep doing what God has called you to do. Shake it off into the fire. Put on the garments of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Don't dwell on the situation. Don't dwell on the snake. Don't try to figure out the viper and his method, but just keep building the fire. Keep putting sticks on the fire. Shake off the criticism. Shake off the feelings of inferiority. Shake off the addictions. And here's a good one. Shake off the past, because the past don't matter anymore. Shake it off. Shake it off. Don't make me get Taylor Swift out here to sing this to you guys this morning. And how do you do that? How do you shake it off? By making a determination in your spirit that you are never going to give up. Just like Paul, when they bound him and put him on a slave ship, he wasn't giving up. Just like when they got blown out to sea in the storm, he wasn't giving up. Just like when the ship went down, he wasn't giving up. When the Roman soldiers said, let's kill them all, he wasn't giving up. When the snake bit him, he wasn't giving up. As a matter of fact, it did not faze him, because he knew that God had called him, and God finishes what God starts it. So he just shook it off, and he just went on doing what God had called him to do. And in those situations, not asking God, please help me, not begging God to intervene, not trying to figure out what's going on, but knowing that He already is taking care of it, and lifting our hands as a child of God who trusts their Father wholly, and just singing out from the depth of your hell, from the depth of your storm, with snake attached to arm. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Bless the Lord and worship His holy name. Amen. Sing like never before, O my Lord, and worship His holy name. Can we just do that for a minute? Whatever situation you're in, whatever storm you're in, you can sit here and you can think about it, and you can dwell on it, and guess what's going to happen? Nothing. You're still going to be in it. You can't will your way out of it. But what you can do is you can determine that in the midst of this storm, I am going to worship and praise God anyway. Shake it off into the fire. So bless the Lord, oh my soul, and oh my soul, and worship His holy name, and sing like never before. And oh my soul, I worship His holy name. And bless the Lord, oh my soul, and oh my soul, and worship His holy name. And sing like never before. And oh my soul, I worship His holy name. Just shake it off into the fire. Why? Why did all this happen? What was the point? Because there's got to be a point, right? I mean, we hope that God has a point. We hope that God isn't just allowing us to go through all the things that we're going through, and we're going to get on the other side and say, God, why did you let all that happen? And God's just like, oh, I thought you did it. God has a point. Well, the island of Malta was so far off course from where they should be. But God obviously had a plan. God always has a plan. God always has a plan. After the natives of Malta saw that Paul didn't die, they were intrigued. And they invited all 276 shipwrecked crew to come to the chief's home. And they stayed there in the chief's home, and they had a feast for 3 days. And the chief entertained them. While they were there, Paul noticed or found out that the chief's father was deathly sick. And so he ministered to him. He went into the chief's father and he prayed with him and laid hands on him, and he was healed. And after that, they stayed on Malta for about 3 months before someone could come pick them up. And while they were there, God used Paul to minister to everyone on that island. As a matter of fact, when they found out what had happened, they started bringing their sick to Paul, and he would lay hands on them, and they were healed. This may have seemed like an unexpected delay to Paul. Paul was like, I got to get to Caesar. I got to get to Rome. You have appointed me to go to Rome. What am I doing in Malta? It may have seemed like an unexpected delay, but what it actually was a divine appointment. God knew exactly what he was doing all along. And then Paul can look back and go, yes, now I know why the ship wrecked. Now I know why you blew us so far off course. Now I know why the viper bit me, because it opened up this door for me to minister to all these people. And then I got to go to the chief's house. And then I got to minister to his father. And for 3 months I got to minister to all these people. Now I got to it makes so much sense. But in the middle of the storm, maybe it was hard to make sense of it. But he just trusted. I'm going to tell you this morning, you may not be able to make sense of the storm. You may not be able to make sense of why you're going through what you're going through. But let me just encourage you that God has a plan. Yes. He has a plan. And at the end of it, it's going to make perfect sense. Because he is right now preparing you and putting you in a place where you will be able to do his work. So you just shake it off and you keep putting the sticks on the fire and you wait and see the doors that God will open for you and the things that you can do for him. Wherever you are, wherever God has you right now, you may think this is an unexpected delay, but maybe it is actually a divine appointment. God has you for a purpose. We can't control our circumstances, but what we can control is our attitude. So you can get upset, and you can get angry, and you can blame God, and you can blame other people, and you can blame the system, and you can blame the church, and you can blame the pastor, and you can blame your mom, you can blame your dad, you can blame anybody you want to. But it's not going to change the situation. Change your attitude. Give God praise and see where God takes you and the doors he opens up for you, even in the midst of this storm. Yes. Shake it off. Let's all stand. Unexpected delays can turn into divine appointments. That's what I want to pray for you this morning. Will you lift your hands this morning? God, I ask you this morning to help our unexpected delays turn into divine appointments. I pray, God, that if we are in the midst of the storm right now, we don't get it, we don't understand it. I pray, God, that you would open up our hearts to understand divine appointments are on their way. Help our attitude, God, that we won't be so focused on the snake and the storm and the wind and the rain, that we'll be more focused on you and what you're doing. Open up our eyes and see how you're working around us, the people that are in our lives that we can minister to. We may not understand why we're here, but while we're here, we're going to continue to seek you. With every head bowed, every eye closed, no one looking around. If you're here this morning and you don't know Jesus, if you're here this morning, I'm talking like you've heard the name Jesus, and you've heard about church, and maybe you've even said a few prayers in certain points in your life. But if you're here this morning, you say, I don't have a relationship with Jesus. I'm not living my life for Jesus. We just very quickly, I'm the only one looking. Just lift your hand up and just take it back down. I just want to be able to pray for you, pray with you. If you're here and you don't know Christ, if you don't know Jesus, will you just lift your hand up and just put it back down? Amen. Anybody else? And maybe at this point in your life, you know that you need him more than ever. I mean, it's apparent. And we're all in different stages of life. We all face our own set of storms. We all face our own struggles. And we all need Jesus. We all need him. I don't want to single you out. I don't want to embarrass you. So I want us all to pray this prayer together. And what this prayer simply says, it says, God, I recognize that I am a sinner. And I recognize that I've made mistakes. I recognize that I've messed up in my life. But beginning today, I want to surrender my life to you. God, I give my life over to you, and I want you to be the Lord of my life. Can you pray that prayer with me? Just repeat after me. Everybody at the same time. Say, Dear Jesus, forgive me of my sins. I know that I've messed up. I know I've made mistakes. I ask you to come into my life, and I surrender my life to you. I give my life to you. And Lord, it's not a lot to give, but what it is, I give to you. You know, the Bible tells us that if we will confess our sins, that He is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins. And it doesn't matter where you've been or what you've done or where you've gone, the mistakes that you've made, the things that you said, that's the past. Now's the present. Tomorrow's the future. What are you going to do with it today and tomorrow? So, Father, I pray, God, for those who have prayed this prayer this morning, maybe for the first time, maybe they prayed it for the 100th time, God, I pray that you would touch them, that you would minister to them, God, that you would just help them to understand and feel that forgiveness, to feel that love. And I pray, God, that in the midst of their storm, God, I know they're not going to walk out of here and all of a sudden things are going to be better, but they're going to walk out of here in the same storm that they walked in under. But God, I pray that in the middle of that storm, you'll give them purpose, and you'll give them peace, and you'll give them joy.